Shabbat Shalom and good Yontif. I know many Jews for whom this day is sacred, as much a part of their ritual calendar as important to observe as the high holidays. For those who found safe haven and opportunity on these shores, for their descendants who were taught to cherish the gifts of liberty that allowed them to work hard and achieve, to make their way, and then to dream of a better future, all free from the threat of persecution. July 4th is nothing less than a holy day. In 1790, when George Washington wrote the now famous letter promising equal rights and freedom of religious expression to the congregants of the Touro Synagogue of Newport, Rhode Island, he conveyed the highest aspirations for the future of the American Jewish community, a minority who were already so much a part of our fledgling nation. Washington wrote, "May the children of the stock of Abraham who dwell in this land continue to merit and enjoy the goodwill of the other inhabitants, while everyone shall sit in safety under his own vine and fig tree, and there shall be none to make him afraid." Safety and religious freedom. In any age, these are worthy of celebration. Washington's words are a subtle nod to the blunt reality that as long as Jews have lived in diaspora, we have been dependent on the government of the land, and more often on the ruler himself, to provide protection from those who would discriminate against us, harm us, and worse. Wondering about the state of the state was a constant concern and preoccupation. And the way Jews in every age managed this concern, this fear, was by openly expressing devotion to the crown, to affirm and demonstrate loyalty, which was especially important if the community was under observation. Whether we lived in Babylonia or Rome, Spain or Russia, this was the unfortunate truth. The prophet Jeremiah taught, "Seek the peace of the city into which I have caused you to be carried away as captives, and pray to the Lord in it, for in its peace shall you have peace." Ezra the prophet urged the people to pray for the life of the king and his sons. The most familiar guidance of this nature is in Pirkei Avot, which is so instructive that it is included in most prayer books. Rabbi Hanina said, "Pray for the welfare of the government, since but for the fear thereof, men would swallow each other alive." Our ancestors seem to say that even an oppressive government was better than nothing, since that kept some kind of protective social order. Rabban Gamliel gave even more specific advice. "Be cautious with the people who govern," he said, "for they draw a man near in friendship for their own purposes. They show themselves as friends when it is to their benefit, but do not stand by a man in his hour of difficulty." This last point is a subtle observation about the dangers of transactional politics and the need for protection against it in order to preserve liberty. Independence Day celebrates the ideal of liberty, and it's the perfect moment for us to ponder what that means when immigrants are being taken off the street and imprisoned, deported, and some even denaturalized without constitutional due process, when a show of force is on display to quell lawful protests or simply as an adornment in our nation's capital, when the media's access to governmental information is increasingly limited to those who report news which flatters, when the authority of courts is being spurned and the neutrality of the Supreme Court is being brought into question, when the president of the University of Virginia, which was founded by Thomas Jefferson, the author of the Declaration of Independence we celebrate today, is forced to resign. Yes, today is the perfect time for us to ponder our place and our liberty, using the prayer for our nation as a guide. Named for its opening words, Hanotain Teshua, meaning one who grants salvation unto kings, the prayer for the government was a plea asking God to make the ruler of a certain country be good to us, originally written to honor King Ferdinand of Aragon, the very king who ordered the expulsion of Jews from Spain, and we see how successful that prayer was. It became a template for nations throughout Europe. Jews living in other countries just inserted the name of their own royals. And since the people who recited it were subject to the king, they would stand when they said it. As our nation experienced its own growth, the prayer underwent some changes reflective of the American experience. For example, before the American Revolution, our ancestors invoked God's blessings on our sovereign Lord, King George. According to Rabbi Charles Arian, it wasn't until 1837 that Isaac Leeser, a minister of Mikveh Israel of Philadelphia, wrote 2 different translations for this prayer in English, though the Hebrew remained the same. One version retained the royal form, which was by then regarded as traditional, and therefore in the eyes of worshipers, immutable. For the traditionalists, in their hearts, they felt that reciting the very same words that their parents and grandparents used created a kind of link to those previous generations. The other translation was meant for a republic. Rabbi Arian noted, by dividing the diaspora into 2 kinds of polities, Leeser implied that they stood differently before God. Everywhere that Leeser's prayer book reached, this dramatic distinction was underscored, reminding Jews who still lived under kings and queens that an alternate form of government existed. It delivered a quiet message of hope and democratic aspirations. In subsequent years, a variety of other prayers for the government were written, but few remained popular. Dr. Jonathan Sarna notes that in the 1820s, the New Reformed congregation in Charleston, South Carolina, wrote a prayer which reads like this: May the lights of science and civilization defend us from every side, from the subtle hypocrite and open adversary. That sentiment could have been penned today but for the elaborate language. And fast forward to 1927, when Rabbi Louis Ginsburg, professor of Talmud and rabbinics at JTS, expressed the same hopes in language appropriate to his day. May citizens of all races and creeds form a common bond in true harmony to banish all hatred and bigotry. A century later, that remains a positive and hopeful way to frame the American experience. In the short history of our nation, we can see how the emotional tenor of Hanotein Teshua prayer changed from one of vulnerability that is dependent on the kindness, goodwill, and compassion of the ruler to one in which Jews have full rights rather than merely privileges. Now we ask for God's blessing upon the office rather than the individual, placing our faith in the structures of government. And so it was in 1945, in the wake of World War II, when Rabbi Mordechai Kaplan wrote the following prayer for Independence Day, which makes Washington's hopes more explicit. It reads in part, "Keep out of our lives all forms of oppression, persecution, and unjust discrimination. Save us from religious, racial, and class conflicts. May our country be a haven of refuge for the victims of injustice and misrule." Kaplan's prayers for the nation are clearly now the institutions of democracy that sustain and safeguard our freedoms. In the course of our own lifetime and that of our parents and grandparents, we have seen how authoritarian leaders can pervert the structures of democracy to serve their own ends, which would thereafter rob us of the freedoms we cherish. Today, as Americans, we may worship freely in our own faith tradition, but as citizens, we cannot expect that prayer alone will continue to ensure and protect our rights. There is a popular expression which reads, "Pray as if everything depends on God. Act as if everything depends on you." So may we rise from our prayer with renewed strength to live the values we cherish and work to ensure the strength of our democratic institutions that protect them. Shabbat Shalom and good Yontif.